Well, friends, at this point, we find ourselves in the presence of two endings. We are this Shabbat ending the book of Genesis, and of course, we are now ending 2023. I want to reflect a little bit this evening on how the book of Genesis does end and how the year 2023 might end. The first, of course, has already ended. We're bringing it to a conclusion. 2023 has not yet ended, but its ending is imminent, as we know. How does the book of Genesis end? A book of several kinds of dilemmas and problems. You may remember that as the book of Genesis ends, Jacob and his family are now all together in Egypt, and they have come down in stages. And that is partly the way to characterize the drama of the story of Joseph and his brothers. Joseph comes down first, of course. Then the brothers come down to get grain, minus Benjamin, who stays at home. Joseph sends them back. They finally come down with Benjamin. Next, Jacob comes down, and the family is united. It is a reunification. Secondly, there are good relationships between the Israelites, known in the book of Genesis as Hebrews. They're not yet known as Israelites. Reconciliation, or at least good relationships between the Hebrews and the Egyptians, and especially Pharaoh. Joseph introduces his family to Pharaoh, and Pharaoh welcomes them and offers them property of their own. We have, of course, the final reconciliation between Joseph and his brothers, that very fraught and broken relationship that animates, that generates the whole narrative of the last third of the book of Genesis. And we do find at the very end, Joseph and his brothers, now reconciled through an act of generosity by Joseph, who, as you may remember, says to his brothers who are still racked with guilt, "It is not you who sent me here, but God, so that we all can continue on into the future." What one scholar calls a therapeutic narrative, on the assumption that perhaps Joseph doesn't really believe this, but that he is saying it so that the brothers can feel relief from their guilt. And now finally, they go together, taking their father's remains up to the land of Israel, there to be buried with his ancestors in the cave of Machpelah. And so, as this story comes to a calm closure, let me read its final verses from chapter 50 of Genesis. "So Joseph and his father's household remained in Egypt. Joseph lived 110 years. Joseph lived to see the children of the third generation of Ephraim. The children of Machir, son of Manasseh, were likewise born upon Joseph's knees. At length Joseph said to his brothers, 'I'm about to die. God will surely take notice of you and bring you up from this land to the land that he promised on oath to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob.'" You can see now tying together that initial promise with the beginning of its fulfillment. "So Joseph made the sons of Israel, Jacob, swear, saying, 'When God has taken notice of you, you shall carry up my bones from here.' Joseph died at the age of 110. He was embalmed and placed in a coffin in Egypt. There, hundreds of years later, almost a half a millennium, Moses remembers that oath and looks to find Joseph's remains before they leave Egypt. This is a happy ending, although we know something they do not know, that danger lies ahead almost immediately. The name of this week's portion is Vayechi, which comes from the word from which we get l'chaim, chaim, life, Vayechi, and he lived. Like several of the names of Torah portions, the word is not just the first word of the portion, but in a certain way captures the essence of what that portion or the book in which the portion exists, what it means. So, for example, we have Chayei Sarah, beginning in Genesis chapter 23, which translates the life of Sarah, which is puzzling because chapter 23 is really about her death and burial. And so we're challenged to ask ourselves, what could this Torah portion title mean? Also, we have the first portion of the book of Exodus, Sefer Shmot, the book of names. And as you may remember, many important things are named in the book of Exodus. The manna, Moses himself, the Israelite people, a kingdom of priests and a holy nation, and so on. So the title of our portion this week, Vayechi, I want to suggest captures the essence of what this portion is about. Vayechi, and Jacob lived. And in fact, finally, he is living with his family as the future looms without their having an inkling about it. I want to turn to the second ending with which we are confronted, and that is the year 2023. I think you will agree that we are all blessed in many, many different ways. We're faced with challenges, with problems, with impediments, and worse sometimes. But it's worth noting, even at difficult times, the blessings which are ours. But, like the ending of the book of Genesis, danger looms ahead in the year 2024. In the Middle East, in our politics, and in our fractious society. And about this, we, unlike Jacob and his sons, we are fully aware. But the name of this Torah portion, Vayechi, I think also can apply to this transition moment, this ending, as a watchword, as a kind of epitome of what we might be willing to face. Not just now how we have lived, but how we might intend to live in the future. And of course, no matter how many things are stirring around us in the larger environment, we always have the choice about how to live our lives at any given moment, notwithstanding the impediments that may stand in the way. To live and how to live. Now, I don't know whether you noticed that a couple of days ago, the New York Times published in its arts section a piece with the title, Artists We Lost, namely artists we lost during this past year, in their own words. And what this two-page piece amounted to was 56 compact self-portraits by those individuals about who they thought themselves to be and what they stood for in their own words. And I was struck, as you may have been had you seen the article, by how powerfully these artists captured, to get not only as individuals, but as a composite, so many components of one of the goals of living, and that is to live a flourishing life. When Aristotle talks about the goal of life, often translated happiness, eudaimonia. What Aristotle really means is something very different from an apparent synonym for happiness, and that is pleasure. For Aristotle, the goal is to live a life of flourishing. And Aristotle has and announces many components of this kind of living. And it strikes me that what these artists wrote about themselves amounts to, together, one of the ways in which we can live a flourishing life. Of these 56 self-portraits, I have selected 6 of them in order to create a picture of how we might choose to live in the year ahead. And I'm going to announce the name, and then I'm going to quote what each of these individuals said, then I'm going to try to distill it. The first self-portrait is by composer David del Tredici, and here's what he says. Hang on to your fantasies, whatever they are and however dimly you may hear them, because that is what you are worth. That's pretty arresting, isn't it? Our fantasies, our dreams, tell us something about who we are and what the quality of our life is. Portrait number 1. Portrait number 2, Rena Glick, dancer and choreographer. And here's what she says. Ever since I can remember, I have danced for the sheer joy of moving. Joanna Merlin, who's an actress, was an actress, quote, actors should approach an audition, and indeed their entire careers, with the firm belief that they have something to offer that is unique. And then she concludes, treasure who you are. Andre Watts, the pianist. Performing is my way of being part of humanity, of sharing, end quote. Magda Sala, a ballerina. I did not do it on my own. Norman Lear, television writer and producer. Let us encourage one another with visions of a shared future, and let us bring all the grit and open-heartedness and creative spirit we can muster to gather together and build that future. I want to read it again. Let us encourage one another with visions of a shared future, and let us bring all the grit and open-heartedness and creative spirit we can muster to gather together and build that future. Each of these 6 artists has described how they have lived or how they have tried to live, how they have aspired to live, and what has animated their efforts and defined their goals. And together, it seems to me, and in one set of these 6 self-portraits, we can obtain a picture of how we might choose to live, one way of thinking about how to live, or how we might insist on living in spite of the many obstacles that arise hourly, daily, weekly, monthly, all the time. How we might insist on living despite the problems we face in our lives and in our society. So let me try to summarize the words of these 6 artists. To live well, we must hold on to our dreams, try to live a life of joy, treasure who we are, think of ourselves not only as individuals, but as part of something larger, of the family of human beings. To recognize that what we are and what we have become is not a product of our efforts alone, but of many other people who have loved us and cared about us and always and ever wished us well. And finally, and we must work together to build a better future. Vayechi, and Jacob lived. Vayechi, let us resolve to live, and to live with our dreams intact, with confidence in ourselves, with joy, with gratitude for loved ones and friends, with a strong sense of community, and with the conviction that great things can be accomplished when we work together. And let us really live purposefully, lovingly, and well in the year to come. Amen.